Okay, imagine, if you will, you're a teenage girl and you live in a perfectly lovely colonial style home with your sister and your dad. Your mum died after a long illness and you're sad. And your dad is supportive and he's trying his best. It's a sad but common enough scenario. Now think about the most frightening thing that could happen to you within this scenario. Yeah, that's pretty grim. But hold that thought for now. Let me tell you a tale that will curl your toes, and indeed any other part of you that's curlable. I don't want to say too much in my preamble. Rather, just let things unfold and let you decide for yourself the nature of the situation. And later, when I go through the background of one of our characters, I also want you to think about who or what is at fault within this story. And I'd love to know your thoughts on it. But by way of a hint, this is the terrifying story of Daniel LaPlante, and this is Murder of Crows. To start our story, we need to look at a family trying to come to terms with the loss of their matriarch. The year is 1986 and we're in Townsend, Massachusetts. In my research, I've seen two different sets of names for the family members, as the story has rather morphed over time, taking on something of an urban myth mystique. But I'm going to stick with the facts that most sources agree on. Tina Bowen is 15 and she has a younger sister named Karen. Their father is named Frank Bowen, and the family are trying to cope with the trauma of Frank's wife and Tina and Karen's mother passing away after a battle with cancer. The grief in the home is palpable, but Frank is working long hours to ensure that he can provide for the girls that he loves so dearly. In the midst of this struggle, Tina answers the phone one day to hear a young male voice, and the caller claims that he knows Frank, and the two have a perfectly nice chat. In fact, Tina found it so pleasant that she and this caller, who called himself Danny, started speaking on the phone more and more often. And Tina was becoming quite taken with the young man who described himself as tall and blonde. And she eventually opened up about her life, including losing her mother. Eventually, Danny asked Tina out on a date and said that he would like to take her to the local fair. And Tina excitedly agreed. But when the date actually happened, it was something of an anticlimactic event. When Tina opened the door enthusiastically, the blonde athletic student was actually a greasy-haired, scruffy, dark-haired boy, and moreover Tina vaguely recognised him from school. But rather than slam the door in his face, Tina decided to give Danny a chance, and the two did indeed go to the fair together. But after spending about an hour with Danny, she was completely underwhelmed, and she made her excuses and returned home. Just another unfortunate stepping stone in the life of a teenage girl trying to cope with hormones, attraction, and further complicated by crushing grief. And it was with this grief in mind that Tina and Karen, while their dad was at work, decided to try to contact their mother using a Ouija board. As you do. But rather than two sisters trying to scare the crap out of each other, both sisters looked quizzically at each other when they heard tapping coming from elsewhere in the house. And this was the start of a series of strange events in the home, with knocking on walls, TV channels changing, and furniture moving. Now, their father Frank was quite dismissive, instead putting it down to the trauma of grief from losing their mother. But the strangeness continued. And on December the 8th, 1986, Frank, Tina and Karen, along with a family friend, finally came face to face with the source of the disturbances. Standing in front of them was a terrifying figure with spiked hair, red face paint, holding a hatchet and wearing Frank's late wife's dress. Jesus Christ on a bike, get me the fuck out of here. But the traumatized witnesses didn't have that option, because the figure began to give orders, herding them all into a bedroom and telling them not to move. But in a move of extraordinary bravery, Tina Bowen made a break through the window and headed straight to a neighbour's home, where she called 911. But when the police arrived, there was no sign of the intruder. The Bowen family described the person as male, in their 20s, and being over 6 feet tall. Now, somewhat understandably, as a result of, a tiny bit of a fright, the family decided to stay away from the home for at least a few days. But a couple of days later, Frank Bowen realized that the family needed some of the items that were still in their home. So he decided to go and pick this stuff up, and as he drove towards the home, he spotted a dark, thin silhouette in one of the upstairs windows. He immediately called the police while he waited outside. Now, the police weren't sure about the report, thinking that the very recent traumatic event was playing tricks on Frank, and after all, lightning doesn't normally strike twice. But erring on the side of caution, the officer moved into the house. His mindset completely changed when, upon entering the home, he glanced to his right, where he saw that a note had been stuck to the wall with a knife that had also passed through a family photograph. This note read, "I'm still here, come find me." And this was quickly followed by finding another note similarly stuck to the wall saying, "I'm going to kill you all." In fairness, at this point, I would be a Steve-shaped blur, leaving an odious brown smoke trail. But the officer stayed where he was, but requested backup to do a full house search. Now, the first sweep found absolutely nothing, but the officer was convinced that the perpetrator was still in the house somewhere, and he requested a second, more in-depth search. Now, eventually a small triangular cavity was found behind a corner of the bathroom that contained pipes for plumbing, but crucially just about large enough for a person to crawl into. And within that space, squeezed into a corner, was what seemed to be a pile of rags. And this turned out to be the tightly squished form of the perpetrator. He was Daniel LaPlante, a 16-year-old who was extremely skinny and stood at around 5'8". The police put the Bowen family description of the man as being older and taller down to the trauma of the event they had been through. And Daniel LaPlante was the very same Danny that had charmed Tina Bowen over the phone before a disappointing date at the fair. It seemed the young man was obsessed with the 15-year-old girl, and he had been living in the walls of the Bowen home for weeks. The account you just heard is as close to the sources as I could be. But as with any curious and fantastical story, it has been subject to enhancements, embellishments and exaggerations over time. So there may be slight differences from what actually happened. But fuck me! Talk about a proper shit yourself experience. But the rest of the story of Daniel LaPlante is based on established fact and is just as terrifying. Brace yourself for the rest of Daniel LaPlante's tale. Now, I want to start with LaPlante's childhood. Not to give him an excuse, but just to serve as an indication of the shitty hand life had dealt him. He was responsible for his later choices, but his early life was about as traumatic as any child could go through, which would obviously have an impact on the young adult he would go on to become. LaPlante was born in 1970 in Townsend, Massachusetts. I've seen reports that his childhood home was on Elm Street. I couldn't completely confirm this, but it would have been pretty bloody apt, as his childhood was a nightmare. His early life was a torment of psychological and sexual abuse from several adults in his life, primarily from his father. He attended North Middlesex High School, and whether through neglect, a lack of self-worth, or a combination of the entire shit show that was his life, he was often unwashed and unkempt, and a diagnosis of dyslexia compounded his lack of confidence and self-esteem. As a result, he had few friends and was widely seen as weird or as creepy. The emergence of a hyperactivity disorder further complicated how LaPlante presented himself to the world. The school referred him to a psychiatrist, and this should have been a positive step in LaPlante being able to address his issues and begin healing and rebuilding. But the psychiatrist sexually abused LaPlante. Yep, as if it couldn't already be bad enough, another adult entrusted with the care of this broken young man went on to do the unthinkable and amplified the negative traits that were already growing within the kid. Rather unsurprisingly for a damaged youth, LaPlante found himself drawn into petty crime as a young teenager and would develop a habit of breaking into homes in the town. And while it did earn him the possessions of the homeowners, it seemed that LaPlante was more satisfied with the pain and suffering that he caused. And it was torment he had in mind when he squeezed into the walls of the Bowen home, especially after Tina Bowen had rejected him. He specifically turned the family's grief against them and made their lives hell for a prolonged period of time, just for the enjoyment of making them upset. He was bailed for this, but his burglarizing ways continued unabated, and despite stints in juvenile detention, he showed no signs of changing his ways. He was well known to the authorities and was usually the first port of call for any break-ins in the area. And this was also true of a break-in at the home of the Gustafson family that happened on the 1st of December 1987. The Gustafson family were Andrew Gustafson, his wife 33-year-old Priscilla, and their two children, Abigail, who was 8, and William, who was 5. Priscilla, additionally, was also pregnant with their 3rd child. On the 1st of December 1987, Andrew was at work when LaPlante broke into the Gustafson home. But Daniel LaPlante was immediately face to face with Priscilla and the 2 children. At this point, most robbers would have fled. But when Andrew returned home, he wasn't met by police talking to a flustered and anxious Priscilla, trying to calm down her upset children. Rather, Andrew found the most heartbreaking and traumatic scene imaginable. Priscilla was lying face down on the bed with the pillows under her head stained red with blood. Later analyses would show that she was sexually assaulted before being shot multiple times in the head at point blank range. 8-year-old Abigail had been drowned in the downstairs bathroom, and 5-year-old William had also been drowned, this time in an upstairs bathroom. It didn't take long for the authorities to link the Gustafson family murder with Danny LaPlante. Police sought to apprehend him, but found that LaPlante had since fled the area, leading to a large-scale manhunt because LaPlante was considered to be armed and very, very dangerous, given that Priscilla Gustafson had been shot. Given LaPlante's history, there was no telling what he might do to try to get away. And in a nearby town, LaPlante broke into a woman's home and kidnapped her along with her vehicle. Now, the woman escaped, but during this process LaPlante was spotted by someone who had seen his photograph on the news. The net closed in and Danny LaPlante was discovered hiding in a dumpster 48 hours after the manhunt for him began. And when he was searched and analysed, a hair belonging to Abigail Gustafson was discovered on his sock, definitively linking him to the murder scene. A year later, Danny LaPlante was sentenced to 3 life sentences for the murder of the Gustafson family. But LaPlante was still reluctant to go away quietly. Since his incarceration, LaPlante has shown little by way of remorse for his actions. And while clearly he was suffering from a multitude of personality disorders, he also continued to show that he was broken beyond repair. For the first 25 years since his incarceration, LaPlante attempted to sue the courts multiple times, saying that the prison system had violated his religious rights because he was a practicing Satanist and therefore required sufficient materials to carry out certain satanic rites, but had been denied by prison officials. Jesus Christ, what a shitbag. In 2017, while appealing for a reduced sentence, LaPlante seems to show a degree of remorse, with him quoted as saying, "I do not have the words to fully express my profound sorrow, but I am truly sorry for the harm I have caused. From the very essence of who I am, from the depth of my soul, I am sorry."
Words cannot fully capture what I have done. My actions have crossed the boundary into the unspeakably heinous. I murdered 3 innocent people.
Unfathomable pain that has lasted since December 1st, 1987.
It's shocking, body rocking, stomach curling.
33-year-old Priscilla Gustafson, who was pregnant, was raped and murdered in her home in Townsend. Her 7-year-old daughter Abby and 5-year-old son Billy were drowned in the bathtub. The killer, Daniel LaPlante, was 17 years old. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive terms of life in prison. But a recent Supreme Court ruling means he must now be resentenced since he was a juvenile at the time of the crime.
But I am truly sorry for the harm that I've caused.
Today, LaPlante stood and faced the judge, not the victim's family, as he stated his sorrow. But the family isn't buying it. Priscilla Gustafson's husband, Andy, remarried in the years after the murders. He passed away several years ago. But today, his second wife spoke on his behalf.
Mr. LaPlante extinguished Andy's family for no apparent reason, sidelined his career, sent him into bankruptcy, ruined his health, and left him a shell of a man for a very long time.
So Daniel LaPlante, for the murder of my sister Priscilla and her unborn child, I forgive you.
Priscilla Gustafson's brother said today he forgives LaPlante for all 3 murders, but he made it clear to the judge, forgiveness is a spiritual thing. It is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. Resentencing will happen in the morning.
Ever want to let that man out of jail again, and they want him to rot in jail for the rest of his life?
I liken him to a rabid dog that needs to be put down. He needs to stay in jail for the rest of his life.
32 years after the brutal rape and murder of their pregnant sister, Priscilla Gustafson, and her 2 children, convicted killer Daniel LaPlante wants out.
And there were 4 lives that he took, not 3. Raped her again and then put the pillow over her head and shot her in front of little Billy. And then he took little Billy and he drowned him in the bathtub upstairs.
The unspeakable crime happened in late fall of 1987 in Townsend, a town about an hour and a half northwest of Boston. A judge sentenced LaPlante, then 17, to 3 consecutive life sentences with no chance of parole. But due to a change in laws for youthful offenders, even in the most horrific cases, there's a chance LaPlante could possibly get parole under new rulings. The convicted killer lost his bid in 2017. His attorneys are now appealing to the state's highest court.
We're asking for resentencing to 30 years.
Priscilla's family says there's no way in hell they'll ever let that happen.
Our task as to honor Priscilla and the children is to make sure that the people of Massachusetts never have to face this man on the street.
For now, it's up to the Supreme Court, and they could take several months to make that decision. In Boston this afternoon, Kelly O'Hara, WCVB News Center 5.
That's right, Doug. Daniel LaPlante will be eligible for parole after he serves at least 15 years of each of the 3 consecutive life sentences. He's been in for about 30 years now. That means he has another 15 years to go before he's eligible for parole, and the victim's family hopes it's much longer than that.
As a family, we're very happy as we could be with the outcome and the circumstances.
Today, relief for the family of Priscilla Gustafson that the man who killed her and her 2 children, Abigail and William, will not be eligible for parole for at least 15 years.
The court finds that the maximum penalty is warranted.
On December 1st, 1987 in Townsend, Daniel LaPlante raped and killed Priscilla Gustafson in her home. She was pregnant at the time. He then killed the children. LaPlante was resentenced today because he was 17 years old at the time of the crime, and higher courts have since held that juveniles cannot be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But there will be no parole anytime soon.
We're satisfied and very grateful the way it went. And also, we will be here in 15 years when he comes out for parole again.
The family says they have an obligation to come back to court, and not just because of Priscilla, Abby, and Billy.
We also have an obligation to the public to make sure that we prevent him from getting out on the street.
Daniel LaPlante is 46 years old now. He'll be in his early 60s the first time he will be eligible for parole. Priscilla Gustafson's nieces and nephews were here today as well. They vow to keep her memory alive and keep LaPlante locked up. Reporting live from Middlesex Superior Court in Woburn, Todd Kiskiewicz, WCVB News Center 5.
LaPlante's final victim, Andrew Gustafson, passed away in 2014. So he was already dead by the time the killer was banished to life imprisonment. But apparently on his deathbed, Gustafson allegedly said, "Don't ever let him out. He should rot in prison." it would have been cold comfort to Gustafsson, but his dying wish was granted. It's clear that Daniel LaPlante was and is a deeply disturbed individual, and he made his own choices and faced the consequences for them, as is right and is just. But I have to wonder what chance he had, given his childhood being among the most traumatic I could possibly imagine. I stress again, I'm not seeking to absolve him of blame. Rather, I'm seeking to understand how these early fractures can result in a young adult so lacking in feeling and remorse. In true crime, for me at least, the manner that a killer is moulded and formed is central in my seeking to understand the cruelty that one person can do to another. Whatever the reasoning, a pregnant mother and her 2 children were slaughtered, and numerous other people, most notably the Bowen family, were deeply traumatized when their homes were invaded and disrupted. So this video is of course dedicated to Priscilla, Abigail, William and the unborn Gustafsson, along with all of the others affected by Daniel LaPlante's antisocial choices that culminated in him taking 4 innocent lives just because he felt they stood in his way. I hope the murder victims have found peace, and that those traumatized by LaPlante's actions have found some degree of healing. Thank you for watching another episode of Murder of Crows. I'm Steve. Samson here says that he believes that you should definitely hit the subscribe button. And between us, we will see you when we see you.
Say that you're ready, but you won't like it. You say that